Hello, everyone. Welcome to Spirit Talk. Just letting a couple people in. And yes, so hey, thank you for joining us. This is First Friday Spirit Talk, where we get together on the first Friday of every month to talk about different spiritual, metaphysical topics in depth. I'm here with Reverend Ginny Brown on my right. She's a clairvoyant healer and coach, and I've got Scout Bartlett down on the bottom of the screen, clairsentient energy teacher, and I'm your host and astrologer and rebellious millennial, Christopher Mitchell. I ask a lot of questions, and they do the psychic stuff, and we see where we can get with things. So if you want to follow us on our Facebook page, that's a great place to hear about what's going on and get the links for new events. And if you subscribe to us on YouTube, you can watch the replays from all of our past episodes. And if you care to donate, I'll put links to everything in the chat box, and all donations go to supporting the show. So for today's episode, the topic that we're going to be digging into together is sexuality. It's a follow-up to last month's episode where we focused on relationship dynamics in a more broad and general way, and that can be found on YouTube. But today we're going to be doing a kind of part 2 to that, where we look at sexuality from a spiritual perspective and all the various juicy, interesting aspects of it. We're all pretty stoked for this one. So jumping right in today, I'm going to go ahead and ask, let's start us off with Scout. So sexual energy is such a big thing in our consciousness. You know, it takes up so much space. I think the Buddha once said something like, if there was another drive as strong as sexuality, nobody would awaken. And so I'm curious about kind of the spiritual reflection point of that, the meaning of that. Why in our psychology and in our lives and in our thinking is the sex drive such a strong and powerful force? What is the spiritual purpose of such a potent energy in our explorations here as humans?
Thanks, Chris. And I want to acknowledge that this month we had so much to talk about on this topic that Christopher graciously bypassed the StarCast for the month. So for those of you that are missing that particular segment, like I am, we'll try and convince him to bring it back. One of the interesting aspects about being a spiritual being in a human body is that we are a spiritual being in a human body. And so there's parts about the body that has its own information, and there's parts about the spiritual being that has its own information, and we're the blend of all of that. And so part of the sex drive part is that physicality. Animals need to reproduce for animals to still be here. Sorry, I was about to crack a gender-bashing joke, and I'm going to try and bypass those today as best I can. But animals need to reproduce for animals still to be here. There's a whole second layer of that from a spiritual aspect, though, which is that when we enter into a heightened or arousal state, we actually elevate the energetic frequency of the body closer to the energetic frequency of our spirit, our essence, our source, God. Another joke bypassed. But as we elevate or move into a heightened state, we're actually elevating the frequency of the body. And so when we enter into a heightened state with others, there's a balancing back and forth between the parts of them that can heighten, the parts of their energetic field that can elevate, and the parts of our energetic field that can elevate, so that we're sort of like co-supporting in that elevation to bring that body closer to that frequency of source, essence, whatever. So there's a place where sex is actually speeding up the frequency of the body and bringing the body and soul closer into harmony with each other and closer together. Now, there's a bunch of side effects of that, but that's a key element of the drive behind that it's very similar to that drive for our own awakening, that drive toward our own spiritual aspect. And just like everything else, there are numerous distractions that can stop us on the way to enlightenment. One of which would be that if we get so wound up with, I'm going to reach enlightenment through being in a heightened state all the time, sometimes we can get distracted to that physically heightened state, the same way that psychic is definitely one of the last stops where we can get confused and get lost on our way to enlightenment. So overly psychic, overly sexed, we can get lost on the way, while both of them are tools. What are you going to do with that, Jenny?
I'm going to talk about the first chakra a bit, and similarly about the dynamics between spirit and body. So the spirit came to the School of Earth to learn how to be a creator, to have an experimental place to play with that. And one of the ways that we create, one of the dominant ways that we create, we can look at it on a metaphysical level, where we're talking about creating from our thoughts, but it's also to procreate and to have children and to go through the process of that. And so some of that drive comes from that innate desire to create something. And the first chakra has a lot to do with that. It's our motivator. In our first chakra, it's the base of your spine, and it governs survival needs, and it governs fear and things like that. And so that drive, that need to create, that need to kind of have yourself keep on living, a lot of parents look at it that way, that they live through their children or through legacy and things like that they leave behind, whether that's, money, children, generations to come, all that sort of thing. There's a way that drive is, that sex drive is triggering some of those things to keep the momentum moving forward, to keep Earth active, and to play out the role of creation, to experience that. So when you look at it in the animal kingdom, it's less about the feel-good aspect as it is about survival. But human beings, we get this opportunity to experience something that also can feel good. So there's a lot of different things that come with that as well, where it can just be pleasure seeking. And part of our sex drive can be driven on that side, but primarily it leans the innate and kind of more amygdala drive that we experience with sex drive is coming from that need to procreate, the need to keep Earth moving. How is that, Chris?
It's pretty good. It's always pretty good. It's great.
Sex is like pizza, right? Even when it's bad, it's good. It's an old joke. Okay.
Even when it's bad, you learn what kind of pizza you like and that you want to order next time. Right. That's a good way to put it, maybe.
This is very unusual for me to be the one person behaving.
I think this episode, none of us are going to behave in the long run, but it's just too much fun to talk about this stuff and bring it into the light together, and so speaking of that, here's a great follow-up question, or not technically a follow-up question, but like my next question that I want to dig into is so not just in spiritual circles, right? Like not just in spiritual thought, but in the collective as a whole, and tradition, and just the way that we have thought about things as a culture. There's been a lot of stigma on, or there's been a lot of emphasis on the monogamous relationship, and in the olden days, like the male and female married monogamous relationship. But even leaving that aside, there's this idea of monogamy as somehow more spiritual or more right. But there's also been kind of a pushback on that, like a progressive trend, both in and out of spiritual community, where more and more people are opening to and playing around with the idea of different kinds of relating, having multiple partners, polyamorous relationships, unconventional relationship models. And so I think it would be interesting to ask, is one more inherently spiritual than the other? is one right and one wrong? Probably not. But like, what is a spiritual perspective on the idea of monogamy versus polygamy, or polyamory rather? I'll toss it to Scout first again here.
It's interesting, Chris. I might reframe that question to say, what's the spiritual perspective around honesty and clear communication versus dishonesty and conforming to an external form of a role? To which I would say that the spirit is 100% behind honesty and openness, and honesty within yourself as well as honesty within your communications with those people with whom you interact. And spirit is not very much behind the take a big enough hammer and you can put your star-shaped peg into a round or square hole. And so what I've observed is that in one-on-one relationships, in one and more relationships, the really key element in the whole thing is the willingness to acknowledge your own information, your own sense, your own reality. The willingness to acknowledge your own reality and the willingness to risk communicating openly with the people that you're wanting to trust. I borrow from, only because I heard it from him, I don't know if he got it elsewhere, Stan Dale, one of his comments was that the word intimacy translates into me you see. And Jung, Carl, not Steve, but Jung made a comment at one point, which I'm going to roughly paraphrase as, his comment was, I believe that those parts that we most seek to keep hidden are the parts that we have most in common with the others around us. One point guidance said to me when I was asking about the major drive for partnering, and their response to me, and some of you that know and have trained with me, you know, it's not sort of surprising that my guidance is a little bit smart aleck, but their response was there's two primary spiritual reasons that we have a real drive toward partnering. One of those reasons is that we've got a major drive toward partnering because that's a place where we can most open out our heart and be most driven toward opening up and having acceptance and being who we are authentically. So authenticity. And then guidance said, and the second reason for that, the second spiritual reason for that major drive toward partnering is that there's nothing else, there are very few other things that are going to push your buttons in jam so well as you can manage to push your buttons in jam with partner or partners. All of which has to do with, it's those moments when we, I'm going to phrase it, find ourselves forced to admit to knowing what we know in ourselves and about ourselves, that are the moments where we really make breakthroughs in authenticity, and from that, even in intimacy, regardless of how many people we're choosing to be intimate with. Now, if you take two people trying to be intimate, there's a lot of complications. Some of y'all may have noticed. If you take 3, 4, 5, 6, 35 people trying to be intimate under whatever format, there's a whole lot of having to come forward, be authentic, and recognize all the parts of you that you would otherwise fearfully think that you needed to keep hidden for fear that it would be a thing that the rest of society would judge and shun you for. So the fun part is if you actually look back in history, this one partner, human being, the two of us are together and we are closed off to all others, is a fairly recent invention. It's slightly older than Western science, but it's certainly not as old as human history. So whether we're moving forward or whether we're making our way back to our roots, or whether it turns out that now what people are finding is the deep love and connection that used to be formed in a village that may or may not have had anything to do with whose bodies were pleasuring whose bodies, but that deep form of connection that used to be formed in a village, now in our rapidly moving society, maybe the way to form that deep connection is to call it a polyamorous pod or group.
Well, monogamy, to me, was around kind of bringing consciousness to action. As human beings, we have this opportunity to bring a lot of consciousness to what we're doing. where in the animal world, you see it's acting on instinct and impulse more. We get this opportunity to really like kind of marinate in this more. And so I think, you know, in biblical terms or in like text and dogmatic principles, really that's what it was coming down to. Like, hey, like have a little devotion, have a little dedication, and look at your partners not as something disposable, but look at them as something sacred. But polyamory, you know, on the other end of the spectrum, is about learning to love and let go, and also to not see love or partnership creating safety through possession, which I think is extremely healthy. I don't think that one is better than the other. I think it's all about what you're here to learn. And so, you know, if you are drawn towards monogamy, you are, you know, kind of karmically making a commitment with one person at a time. Like, how much can I learn from this one particular person? How much can I learn from this one particular situation and its dynamics? And if you're into more polyamorous, you know, if you lean that way, you know, there's a whole lot of development in that regard too, because you're learning from multiple partners. You're learning about self-safety. You're learning about intimacy, and most importantly, about the letting go piece, which, you know, you can look at it dogmatically. Again, like you could see that through like Buddhist teachings about detachment, like not looking at things, not becoming attached to things in this world and seeking safety through them. So it really just kind of depends on what side of the spectrum. You know, if you're focused on devotion, if you're focused on, you know, really wanting to kind of like dig your heels in and, you know, learn a lesson as intimately and you know, to just like a really, really deep level, then you might be drawn towards more one-on-one relationships. But there definitely isn't a better than or less than, you know, when it comes to this, because both will evolve you and challenge you on a deep level. Chris?
That's really interesting. I love all of that and how many bases we just covered there. And I can reflect on that astrologically too, that like one person might have their Venus in Libra, you know, Venus showing the way that we relate to each other, and having it in Libra would indicate like a disposition towards exploring deep, dedicated, devoted partnership with one person, like Ginny's talking about. Maybe with one person, at least definitely deep, devoted partnership. But another person might have it in Sagittarius, craving freedom, conjunct Uranus, making it like progressive and out there, and they might, kind of like Scout was pointing to, be in this radical other experiment, other learning journey of seeing how much they can step into authenticity and communication and navigating what is seemingly complex with as much kind of grace and like self-centeredness as they can. And like both are really interesting and valid learning journeys. And I just think that's really cool that we can see meaning in both, but also recognize that maybe the increasing amount of conversation around it points to something about growing consciousness around authenticity and communication values and all of that as well, that we're becoming more and more able to navigate trickier and trickier dynamics as we become more and more conscious, you know, and stepping up to that challenge and growing through it is very interesting. So kind of an interesting follow-up to that, laced in with it really is the question of casual sexuality versus like, you know, sacred, deep, devoted sexuality. Is there any harm or negativity in casual sex? Does it hold us back in some way from deeper realization and connection, or can it be seen as a step along the way to those things? I guess Scout's first on all of these today. I'm going to pass it back to him again.
I'm going to jump backwards in topic for only a half a second. There's just a piece I want to toss in that I've noticed in our culture. There's a real tendency to look at, let's say, a one-on-one relationship. There's a real tendency to look at that as 1 + 1 makes one, where I'm me having a life, they're them having a life. But when we join together, I become their other half or they become my other half. And it's a 1 + 1 makes 1 with a whole lot of shaving off a lot of what was me to fit me into being the other half of this other. And in terms of spiritual growth, in terms of progression, what we're really wanting is 1 + 1 makes 3. There's me as a human being continuing to do the things that feed and nurture me. Because lots of you may have noticed the pattern of I'm out there in life between relationships. If I'm serially monogamous, I'm out there in life between relationships, doing the things that feed me, doing the things that nurture me, doing the things that make me grow and expand. Somebody else is out there in life doing the things that feed them, doing the things that nurture them, doing the things that make them expand. And then we join into a relationship. And the first thing I do is start dropping off all of those things that feed and nurture me, as if those were just the ballast of what I did when I was solo. And instead, maybe I used to love to like get out and run in the morning or go roller skate in the morning, but my partner doesn't wake up early. And so, well, I don't need to run in the morning anymore. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe they used to go play poker for no money whatsoever just to hang with their guy friends once a week. But, well, they don't want to leave their partner at home alone. So now they're not hanging with their guy friends. And certainly, and this gets talked a lot more in the, I'm going to gender for a moment, but it gets talked a lot more in the female culture of, wow, I've got my friend and we're hanging out and we're doing stuff. Oops, my friend just got a boyfriend. Well, I'll see them later. And embarrassingly enough, it's a story in my own history that I called up a very long-term friend of mine at one point in time, called him up, said, hey, how you doing? And he said, I'm doing great, Scout. Sorry to hear you guys broke up. I really liked, name of girlfriend at the time. I really liked her. I thought she was great. And I paused and I couldn't figure out how he possibly was in the grapevine chain that would have had him heard of that breakup. And so I said, well, how did you know? And he paused and said, well, you called, didn't you? Oh, ow. Yeah, busted cold. And yeah, exactly. Kazoo, pow. And a pattern that I definitely set out to change, because there's a whole lot of 1 + 1 makes 3 is the spiritual goal of interconnecting and interacting with other people. Short jump back to Christopher's question would be to say, any soothing distraction is a soothing distraction. Doesn't mean a soothing distraction is harmful. Doesn't mean a soothing distraction is bad for you. Doesn't mean a soothing distraction isn't educational. Doesn't mean that a soothing distraction doesn't let you explore all the pizzas on the buffet to finally figure out which kind of pizza you actually like, prefer, is most gratifying. And so I don't see that any aspect of being a human being is a mistake. It's the win some, learn some theory, except that you win on all of them because you learn on all of them when there's when you bring a certain amount of awareness to your own equation of noticing what it did for you. I'm still laughing at the fact that when Dr. McGraw came forward into the television, launched by Oprah into a television presentation, that it stunned the world that he had his singular, surprising thing to ask people to do. Wow, you're doing this thing, you're standing by it, you're defending this thing, but have you stopped to look to see how it's working for you? What a shock that was to the Western world, and it built a multi-billion-dollar career out of that, or at least multi-million-dollar career out of, whoa, people, is what you're doing working, and have you bothered to notice? And sometimes we don't. So we're back to building our own energy and expanding our own energy so that we actually see us and so that we do notice. So that was my dance around Chris's question. I'm going to give it to Ginny.
Well, what Scout's talking about, the 1 + 1 = 1, that's because our energy merges during sex. And especially if there's like a unified orgasm at any point, like there's a place where higher beings are touching and they make this connection and they have a hard time separating. And the deeper or the more that we do that, the more we merge and the more our energy blends with another person. And that desire for 1 + 1 to equal 1, I like to blame it on Adam and Eve, just this whole idea that there is a separateness that we're looking to make ourselves whole with, and that being another person or the ideal partnership or the perfect partnership. And instead of seeing ourselves as whole and looking for another whole, a we does arise out of that, but it's something to stay conscious of. And I think that casual sex is fine if you're conscious, but anything you do unconsciously, whether it's eat, whether it's sex, whether it's do drugs or drink or whatever, anything that is coming from an unconscious place will carry with it karmic lessons, just for you to kind of unravel and bring consciousness to. So, when you're engaging in casual sex, it's just to bring consciousness to it. Like, am I just wanting, something fun and to play with and to engage with? Yeah, go for it. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. And also, when those things are all consensual, they're all consensual. There's nothing wrong with that. The body has desire just as much as the spirit has desire. And in this very specific topic, they get to collaborate on a very high level. So the body just may need to release. It may desire touch. The body, it's only experience. Our spirit just incarnates and gets a new body all the time. It's getting a brand new car all the time. Where this body, whenever I'm getting a massage or engaging in sex, it's like, this is my body. I want it to have the majority of the experience, and I want to bring as much consciousness into that experience as I can, because I want it to enjoy it. So that's where the pitfall is. That's where it can get shadowy, that casual sex can become compulsive or addictive or disconnected. But if you allow yourself to be really connected during it, I think you're giving yourself a really profound opportunity to connect and explore and to merge with people, which inevitably leads to feelings of love and growth and connection. Chris?
And there is a place where there's a confusion that does jump up, of if they'll have sex with me, then they approve of me or they validate me. And so if what we're doing is we're seeking to find out whether or not the outside world votes yes, that we're approve worthy or validatable, is that a word? But if we're looking to that to find out if the outside world votes yes, you're approvable, yes, you're validate worthy, skip that word, we can get really lost in, oh, well, that person validated me, but that person is only this high a ranking in my social estimate. So would this person that's a higher ranking in my social estimate approve of me or not? And it can be lost in it. There's a whole lot that gets lost in that equation, which brings us right up to meditation time. I need to hush.
Yeah, so at the middle of every Spirit Talk, we turn it over to Ginny or Scout for a 5-minute guided meditation. And today it is Ginny's turn. So sit back and relax.
Go on a ride together. It won't be like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride this time.
Listening to the
So
soothing
let's just go
tones of
ahead.
Reverend Ginny Brown.
Well, let's just go ahead and together, let's take a nice big deep breath in. And exhale. And let your eyes close if they haven't already. And I invite you to say hello to yourself. To your place here on the planet. And say hello to the theme of desire. Ask yourself, what is it that I want more of? Allow these things, these feelings, to begin to surface. They could be themes like freedom, connection, or love. Could be partnership, exploration, or friendships. Invite these themes to surface. And ask yourself if you give yourself permission to have them. Are you allowed to be abundant? Do you give yourself permission to be free? How much love is too much or too little? See if you can raise this permission level just a little. And see how it feels. As a creator, you define your limitations. You set your boundaries. And you're allowed to want. See if you can raise this permission level just a little bit more. And ask yourself, where in my life currently do I have all that I desire? See that expand and attract more. To see past your limitations. And then call your attention back to this space we share together with an expanded sense of your own desire. And when you're ready, open your eyes and end your meditation.
That was great. I love how that was designed to help stir up any kind of like stuck energy under the surface around the topics that we're discussing and let us all get a little more free, and like it's like a personal energy healing for each of us, worth going back and listening to that one. And I even tried to leave like a minute or two early to like race back to the house and get the salad ready, but I'm still having a second where I'm having to ground and find my way back into question mind. It was a running joke on Spirit Talk where we see if how long it takes Christopher to come back to host mode after being energy elevated and meditated by these two powerful teachers. But so I know where we're going. Scout, next question's yours first. It's, how can we understand sexual orientation from a spiritual perspective? Put it out simple this time.
Yeah, perfect. Shortest version of that is you don't have to understand it, or there isn't a way to understand it. It just is. But I want to jump backwards a little bit because there's a topic that's really dear to my heart that Ginny touched on earlier when it wasn't my turn to talk. So first off, sexual orientation has everything to do with what it is that revs up your buttons. If we go to the science of it, we find out that science says between 7 and 10% of us are specifically one orientation, either hetero or homo. And everything else, the other 80-some% in between, is all different shades of how far up and down the scale you are. And so it is, again, back to a place from a spiritual perspective. It's whatever body I shoveled into to have whatever experience I came into to have wherever I'm going. But I wanted to talk about that energy blending part that Jenny alluded to earlier. So I brought some guests today. Did that do that? Yeah. I brought some guests today to help us out a little bit. So we've got the two of them, and they are somewhat binary, I will admit. But so I brought some guests to help us out. Now, there's a whole practice that gets referred to as Tantra. And it gets pretty deep and pretty complex, but I'd like to share with you just a really, really, really simple aspect of building that energy blend between us. That's really even more of what it's about than sex. If you've had the experience where your sex was cold leftover pizza that wasn't particularly good, it's because there wasn't an energy blending. If you had those moments where it didn't have anything to do with sex or orgasm, but you felt particularly blended, that might have been even more satisfying than unblended physical activity. Casting no aspersions on unblended physical activity. You do you be you, you go where you're going. But a really simple tantric practice that you can practice with a partner. And I find that lots of people discover that their life is way too hectic for the physical exertion of let's go get it on. We'd like to, we're headed to bed too, but by the time we get the kids to bed, by the time we get the last of our work done, there ain't a whole lot of juice left for going to the gymnasium. We can build that blending, and I've had couples that I've worked with that have had significant amounts of building of that blending with them, for them, where they found that their relationship had gone difficult, where things had gone off a little bit, that if they rebuild the energetic blending, they refine both themselves and their partner. So very simply put, and you can reference this, I think it's out of print at the moment, but you can find used copies. My first teacher, Betty Bethers, Bethards, my first teacher, Betty Bethers, brought out a beautiful book called Sex and Psychic Energy. I think Inner Light Foundation has let it go out of print for the moment. Scold. But I think you can probably find used copies because it sold pretty well when it was out. And you can reference this same practice in that book. The simplistic practice is, if it's a male-female binary, this is how it works, male-female. If it's not male-female binary, just restack accordingly. But if we have the woman on her back, and we're going to give you sort of a semi-top view here. The woman lies on her back, and then the man is on his side, perpendicular. Now, you may need a pillow under the behind for the woman to make everything balance out, but you interweave, top view, you interweave the legs so that he's on his side with his legs interwoven with hers while she's on her back. I know it's hard to illustrate, but that's the best I can give you here. So she's on her back, he's on his side, they're perpendicular, and your legs are interwoven so that your genitals get to be close with each other. If it's male-female binary, you actually want the penis in the vagina, and I always quote Betty on this one. People would ask, well, what if the penis isn't hard? And Betty's comment would be, well, stuff it. There you go. That's why I quote her. If I say that, it sounds crude. If she says that, it was cute. So the woman's on her back, the man's on his side, perpendicular, The legs are interwoven, and the only way you can interweave them to get your genitals to come together. And then comes the key element, which is breathing. When she inhales, she imagines inhaling from the top of his head, down through him, up through the connection, and out the top of her head. He exhales while she inhales, and he's imagining exhaling down through his body, up and out the top of her head. So when she's inhaling, she's pulling energy down through him, up through her. When he's exhaling, he's putting flowing energy down through him, up through her. So it's going in the same direction. Then when she exhales, she's flowing down through her and up through him. He's inhaling while she exhales, so he's pulling down through her and up through him. So it's sort of the energy flows down through you and up through your partner and out their head, down through your partner and up through you and out your head, while you alternate breathe. And you match to that alternate breathing. So I found that sometimes I'll actually rest my hand on the abdomen of my partner while I'm laying perpendicular so that I track their breath. I will tell you, there'll come a point in time where you lose track of who's breathing in and who's breathing out, because when you really hit a level with this, you actually merge and it's one breath. Even though your partner's breathing in, you experience breathing in. Even though you're breathing out at the same time, you experience you breathing out and breathing in. It merges, and that's the goal we're after, is to get all of that to blend. Now, what I found is that ideally you do this for a period of time, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 6 hours, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and then release. But what I found is that sometimes in amazingly, fabulously, we work 62 hours a week, busy schedules, what we do is we get into that pose and we do that, one gets in that pose and one does that alternate breathing until one sort of like forgets that that's what they're doing and falls asleep. And I will tell you every now and then that genital contact, we're doing the alternate breathing. And in pure Tantra, this is naughty, but in, we'll call it Western Tantra, every now and then that genital contact and that blending of breathing leads to heightening. And if indeed that goes from a passive exchange of breath to an active athletic endeavor, go for it. Enjoy it. Have a great time. Fabulous. Good for you. You found time to actually have sex during a busy week. But the key part is that breathing allows you to re-blend those energies. And let's say that you and your partner have hit one of those little levels of discord where I guess there's one joke that when you first meet each other, sex is hot and heavy all the time. And later, when you've been partnered for a while, sex is once in a while. And then when you've been partnered for a long time, sex is saying screw you when you pass each other in the hallway. If you've reached sort of that stymie place in your relationship, to do this energy blending of the exchange of breathing, even if it's just for a few minutes each night before you pass out and go to sleep, you're going to find that it'll reopen the sense of connectedness in the other parts of the relationship as well. Not that it will solve the do we or don't we invite your mother to Thanksgiving, but it will reopen the ability to feel the connectedness and get both sides of it. Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here. Thanks for coming. Nice to see you all, and we'll let them leave.
They were so brave, just to do that in front of all of us. Like, I'm just so impressed with that Bunny and Bear. I think the question was around, what was the question, Chris?
Sexual orientation.
Okay.
That was educational and interesting, Meg.
What if you're not sure whether you're a bunny or whether you're a bear, I guess?
Yeah. So when two bears together or two bunnies together or a bear and a bunny, is it a choice? Is it built in? Are all bunnies and bears both bunny and bear sexual, or do some bunnies only like bunnies and some bears only like bears? That's kind of where we're at with this. Okay.
Well, I find myself more in the rainbow llama middle spectrum of things, like
there are more than just bunnies and bears. I'm so sorry.
On this show, for sure. But Scout pointed to it beautifully. It is a spectrum. Sexuality is a spectrum, and depending on what we're here to work on and learn through, our where we find ourselves on that spectrum may be a bit swayed, and we have gnomes. So when we're finding ourselves, I think identification is the root of a lot of our suffering. So, and sexuality is one of those places that we tend to very heavily identify. And so I tend to, just for myself, try to stay rainbow llama, like in the middle, open to a lot of possibilities and out of identification. But really it comes down to choice. This whole planet by design is around choice. So when you're exploring, your sexuality, what feels good to you, and also kind of like what lessons you're wanting to learn, those dynamics play out a lot in who we choose as partners, regardless of gender. So, if you're wanting to learn about power dynamics, or you're wanting to learn, about female energy or whatever, regardless of, you may attract in a heterosexual couple as a female, you may attract men with more feminine energy. And I've read that wonderful book Scout was referring to about sex and psychic energy, in that she talks about there's always a balance, regardless of gender. And so whether, I can run a lot of masculine energy, sometimes the men that I find myself with run a lot of feminine energy, or if I'm with a woman, I find myself, it can balance the other way. So it doesn't really matter as much as that the dynamics themselves will find a balance, and it doesn't have to always be polarized. I think in marriages and situations where there is long-term partnerships, you always want your partner to show up as this very specific type, right? Like as a very stoic man or whatever, and not let them drop into their feminine energy, not let them have their emotion. But it's important to have a little bit of that switch, regardless of the relationship, is to honor that inside of both of us is male and female energy. And really that spectrum helps us to lean into one more than the other, and to explore it. But I think in the most healthy relationships, you allow a balance of both. Chris?
Cool. Okay. So let's see. No, it is cool. I don't know. That's the hardest part for me is what do I say after they say all this interesting stuff, and I'm trying to segue to the next question.
I see.
Yeah, it's very cool. And I was thinking about how it could also kind of be applied to, in, for example, gay relationships, like the idea of like who's what position. The same conversation carries over to that in a way. And again, identification can be kind of a hang up there, where people think they're just one thing or just the other thing. And they don't realize it's a spectrum of evolution and exploration, and that in essence, we're all pretty versatile, though maybe we've got a lot to learn about one side or the other in this particular lifetime experience, But
It
again,
doesn't
not
have to be identity. It can be about preference, right? Like I may prefer a partner to show up in this way with me, more dominant or more submissive or whatever, but I don't have to identify with it, because that identity is going to create a very fixed reality, and that's where the ego has kind of like infiltrated a very sacred space. So it's like, allow it to be a preference. And I see no problem with that whatsoever.
And there's a whole lot of magnetism involved. The more that we are what we are, the more that we magnetize what either matches to or fits with what we are. And so, I mean, I look at the world, well, first of all, I look at the world that everything is energy and every non-thing is energy, but that it's all magnetics. And the more we light up and are what we are, the more we find that we draw that complement or that match, or even some cases when we're like stuck, the conflict, the more we draw that. And so that we get to then explore that and allow ourselves to give ourselves either the caution of, oh my God, I don't want to misstep and lose this, which is a drag, or the, okay, it's working for me to be me. Let me continue to. One of the things I find funny to point out to couples sometimes is that they found each other when they were doing the things that feed and nurture them, and they were living as themselves. And then they blend together as a couple, and they stop doing the things that feed and nurture them, and they start trying to do the things they think that blend them as a couple. And then they're surprised that their partner may or may not really dig that person because they liked the person they met. But we tend to like blend for safety reasons or whatever. The more that we are what we are, the more we both express that in everything we do, and the more we magnetize that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I was having the thought while we were talking about this that in my experience, even just personally, the cleaner that I'm vibrating me, the cleaner that the match that I attract is. And when I'm kind of confused about being my authentic self, or not holding boundaries, not communicating, whatever it might be, then I attract somebody who's a little messy, but even that is just to show me more of who I actually am, so that I can vibrate more of who I actually am, so that I can attract someone who is who they actually are, and we can be who we are together. And when it's messier than that, it's to help direct us towards that. And when it is that, it's pretty clean and good.
I am I, and you are you, and we are we, and we are all together. Cuckoo-ca-choo.
Cuckoo-ca-choo. Okay, I got one, maybe two more questions, but I think this
Sorry,
will be
Chris. That was a cultural reference before your time.
I know the Beatles.
Oh,
I know the
millennial.
Beatles. I know
On
the Who.
point.
I know Yes. I know Supertramp. I know lots of things. Scout. I know Supertramp, right? That saxophone. Um, so,
So,
um,
are you saying referencing Super Tramp was your segue back into our topic?
Yeah, is that a question or?
saxophones.
Ah,
Period. Mic drop. They relate to sexuality, right? I think that's pretty
oh,
clear cut.
every
No
instrument.
explanation needed.
Mhm.
So, so what do our kinks represent energetically? Can those kinds of points of attractions tell us something about ourselves? How can we understand those spiritually and energetically? Scout?
Phew. All right. Where I live, I study everything in patterns of energy, and I either discover that we have an open energy flow, or we have a tangle or a KNOT knot. And that my practice and my work with people is to untangle the KNOT knots, which also untangle the psychological NOT knot, the resistances. It's my whole practice. It looks different in action, but that's basically what I'm doing all the time. In some cases, places where we would feel ourselves being drawn towards something that's outside what we think is the societal norm, what we're really on an energetic place, discovering that that is an aspect of how we flow, but that particular part of how we flow, we're feeling is jammed up against this external idea of a limitation. And we do have to remember that there have been certain religious practices that thought the whole notion of actually interacting with your partner without clothes on while you made babies was kinky as heck if you did it without like scratchy, awful underwear. And there's other societies that you would have had a hard time finding anything in that society defined as outside the norm enough to be kinky, except maybe trying to like be norm. It's a whole lot about where am I containerizing myself, or where did my energy pattern get imprinted with something outside of me that then created a shape that the inside of me is wrestling with to pop back open, or to pop that tangle free and allow my authenticity and my aliveness to flow. So in some cases, places where we're outside the norm is because we got a sense of restriction and we're going full tilt 100% as opposed to just back to normal. In other places, it's just that that particular spirit moved into that particular body, and that particular combination just can't grasp that these silly limitations ought to be limitations. It's always about opening. And Ginny's going to have more lovely things to say about that.
I love this question, just for so many reasons. My inner 13-year-old is just doing a little jig about it. But ultimately, I'll tell this through a friend's story. He was in a monogamous marriage and they decided to open it, and they became poly. And through their polyamorous relationship, where they had separate partners, they weren't partnering with people together, he started to lean towards different kinks. And when I saw him after not seeing him for about a year, he was glowing. He was his most like dynamic self. And we started to talk about it. And what came to the surface is that through rote play and these different things that he was interested in, or becoming very interested in, he was learning about trust. He was learning about control. He was learning about love through that as a dynamic. And he told me these really beautiful stories about being trusted by women and learning how to kind of deepen his own trust in himself through that. Now, to me, there is absolutely no greater lesson than that, is to dive into something and to really cultivate a spiritual lesson through it. And also, I think the more that we bring God into our lives, here comes the Reverend for you. But if we hold something in shame, right, and we feel like this is wrong, I like this and this thing is wrong. Okay, that's what guilt and shame kind of root into, right? And we find a community or other people that love and accept you and also like this thing, it's healing. You've made a connection of God through that. Now, there is a gray area, but I think you guys know the areas that I'm talking about here. And if not, I'm happy to clarify. But there's a way that when you connect and you have brought God into the bedroom, you've invited love and acceptance into your life, that you're able to love and accept those things that you were holding in guilt and shame about yourself. And truly, it's just a curious mind. It's a curious mind looking to find a spiritual lesson through an exercise. For some, it can be pain, of learning that pain is not bad or pain is not deadly, and that you can actually enjoy pain. You can enjoy getting hurt. And it's not so much about there is a level of masochism and sadism in that, but that's not wrong. It's okay to have a pain tolerance, and it's okay to learn through your pain. And it's okay to learn that it's not going to kill you. I can't tell you how many of my clients would benefit from something like that. So, really just look for the deeper evolution in it. And, the way that I've seen my friend evolve and come into himself, into self-love and ownership, I celebrate it. Chris?
Yeah, I guess I just want to share too that an idea that has really informed me that I encountered was the notion that in some way our attraction points, not just sexually, not just kinkily, but like our attraction points point to our healing and our trauma.
Mm-hmm.
They point to the things that we feel a lack around, or that we feel a desire around, that we feel cut off from, or that we feel guilt and shame around. And so bringing the charge off those things and bringing them into neutrality is, of course, essentially healing. And I think so we can, and I've learned about myself through looking at the things that I find myself attracted to, and invariably have found that, yes, they do point to my journey. Yes, they do point to the shape of my experience. And they do all have an innocence to them about what I'm really looking for and what I've always been looking for. And they've helped me on a road to healing and becoming more whole within myself. And I think, Ginny, what you were pointing at there with the gray area is that there's, if it's healthy to express and explore and bring out of the shadow, express and explore and bring it out of the shadow. And if it's not healthy for everyone, then find out what the inner innocence and the wounding and the healing underneath it is, and bring that out of the shadow.
Absolutely. There's sometimes and oftentimes with sexuality, part of us gets trapped in time. And we may need to bring that self into present time so that we can experience our sexuality in a healthy way. And it may come along with some of those desires that we had as kids, or, when our sexuality was developing, but it doesn't make in present time, nothing is wrong. In a healthy self, nothing is wrong. And so it is about bringing in and understanding, maybe healing something that was stuck in time and bringing it forward.
Wonderful. What a wonderful, interesting conversation this has been. I'm so glad we all went here together. And I'm Christopher Mitchell. Email me at unlimitedastrology.com if you want to get in touch about sessions or anything else. And Ginny Brown and Scout want to say their piece real quick, and then we'll see you next month for the first Friday Spirit Talk on the 3rd of December.
Oh, that's right. Third, I had to do some math there. I don't know why I was trying to do math. Not my forte, but my name is Ginny Brown. Do individual couples counseling, work with families, you and your pet, whatever you got going on. Hit me up, check out my website, and some new offerings are on their way. Scout.
And I'm Scout like Pathfinder, Bartlett like Pears. Part of my tithing to the world is that I do a radio show that we produce through KEST 1450 AM in San Francisco called Life Insights Live, which has been recognized as the longest running major market spiritual growth radio program in the nation. But we broadcast it every Monday and Wednesday, but we archive it up on the website. We've got about 500 hours of training in consciousness, personal development, personal growth, and psychic awareness that's all available to you for free. Go in, and you have to register on the website for some of it, but we don't even put you in the mailing list. I do work with individuals. I work with families, as a matter of fact. That frequently happens. And it's all working with energy, and so we appreciate that. But I also want to mention, please do go in and find the First Friday Spirit Talk up on YouTube and subscribe. Hit the subscribe button, because there's certain things that we can do as we reach different numbers of subscribers. So, go gather up your outlaw embroidery gang and have all of them go in and click. And I don't care if they watch it or not. Well, we'd like them to watch it, but I don't. If they don't, we just want the numbers. So gather up your whole outlaw needlepoint team and have them go into First Friday Spirit Talk up on the website, and go ahead and mark your electronic calendar now for the first Friday of every month, because one of them will actually be on the first Friday of April, but we're going to do it anyway. April Fools. No April Fools to it. Go ahead and mark your electronic calendar, because holiday or not, we'll be there. And again, I want to thank our special guest for today for their courage to come in and perform, to model. Much appreciated for our models. And thank you all very much for being here, deeply from the center of my heart. Thank you for coming in, and thank you for your support of being present. And if you donate, that's even better. Fabulous. Love you all. Have an absolutely fabulous day, because it's a perfect day for you to have a great day on purpose.